One locomotive could tear up its own crankshaft. Another caught fire because of its wiring. One needed a private repair track and mechanics flown in from Germany. And a British diesel became famous because its cab windows could fall out while the train was moving. These are 10 locomotives crews cursed, mechanics dreaded, and railroads wanted gone. Number 10 starts with 3,600 horsepower and an engine that could destroy itself. The SD-45 looked like a winner. American railroads were chasing horsepower in the 1960s, and EMD wanted the crown. So it took the proven 645 diesel, stretched it to 20 cylinders, and created a 3,600 horsepower freight locomotive with a long body and those unmistakable flared rear radiators. Railroads bought more than 1,200 of them. Then the crankshafts started failing. Under heavy stress, the welded engine block could flex. When the crankshaft let go, it did not simply stall the locomotive. It could tear up the engine around it and send the whole unit into the shop for a repair no railroad wanted to pay for. The extra 4 cylinders were thirsty too. Compared with the 16-cylinder SD-40, the SD-45 burned more fuel for only about 600 additional horsepower. That trade looked great in a brochure. It looked much worse when the locomotive came apart before finishing the job. EMD strengthened the block and reduced the failures, but the reputation was already damaged. Many railroads kept buying the simpler SD-40 instead. Others later pulled the 20-cylinder engines out of their SD-45s and installed smaller 16-cylinder replacements. Most were eventually retired, scrapped, or rebuilt so heavily that the original design nearly disappeared. The first production SD-45 still survives, Great Northern Number 400, better known as Hustle Muscle. And yes, Hustle Muscle suffered a crankshaft failure during its working life. By the early 1980s, EMD had a different problem. General Electric was no longer the underdog. GE was gaining sales, and EMD needed a modern answer fast. Instead of waiting for a completely new engine, the company pushed the familiar 16-cylinder 645 harder, up to 3,500 horsepower, and later 3,600. The SD-50 was supposed to carry EMD from the dependable Dash 2 era into a computer-controlled future. Instead, the extra output brought punishing vibration. The locomotive became known for engine failures, cracked components, and electrical gremlins. Crews could not always trust an SD-50 to finish the run, which is a bad reputation for any freight locomotive, and an especially bad one for a company built on reliability. EMD produced more than 500 of them, so the problems were impossible to hide. Every disabled unit was another public demonstration for customers already watching GE improve. Then came the embarrassing fix. Railroads discovered that dialing some SD-50s back to around 3,000 horsepower made them much more dependable. In other words, the locomotive often worked better after losing the power increase that had justified it. Some were rebuilt into machines much closer to the older SD-42 generation they had been meant to replace. The SD-50 did not knock EMD out of the market by itself, but it arrived at exactly the wrong moment. Every cracked component and failed engine made GE look like the safer bet. GE got the opening. The Alco PA may be the only locomotive on this list that people will defend while admitting the engine was a headache. It was beautiful. GE designer Ray Patton gave it a long nose, a broad face, and a shape that looked fast while standing still. When the locomotive accelerated, turbo lag could make it belch enormous clouds of black smoke. Rail fans loved that. Catching a PA in full smoke became part photography, part sport. The railroads paying the bills saw something else. Behind that body sat Alco's Model 244 engine. Management had rushed it into production while trying to catch EMD's successful passenger diesels, and the design was not ready. The engine became unreliable, expensive to maintain, and unable to match EMD's reputation for dependable power. Alco eventually developed the much better 251 engine, but by then the PA's reputation was already damaged. General Electric ended its partnership with Alco. Passenger traffic declined. Railroads began scrapping the locomotives with very little sentiment. Nearly 300 PA and PB units had been built. Only a handful survived. One former Santa Fe PA spent roughly 2 decades being restored by Doyle McCormick into Nickel Plate Road, number 190. The railroads had discarded the PA as an expensive problem. Preservation groups spent years bringing one back. That is the Alco PA in one image. A machine the industry could not wait to retire, and fans refused to forget. By the 1990s, America's 2 biggest locomotive builders were fighting over one number: 6,000 horsepower. GE wanted it. EMD wanted it. Neither company wanted to be the one that admitted 4,000 might already be enough. GE reached production with the AC6000CW, one of the most powerful single-engine diesel locomotives ever built. Its new 7 HDL prime mover promised more than 6,000 horsepower from one engine. The sales pitch was simple. 2 6,000 horsepower locomotives could replace 3 4,000 horsepower units. Fewer locomotives, fewer engines to manage, more power in each one. Then the new engines started fighting back. Vibration contributed to turbocharger failures and other mechanical problems. The trouble became serious enough that Union Pacific accepted more than 100 locomotives with older, proven 4,400 horsepower engines installed temporarily. They were supposed to receive the big engines later. That upgrade never happened, and GE was not alone. EMD was chasing the same dream with the SD9OMAC. The entire industry had convinced itself that the next great freight locomotive would be defined by one enormous horsepower figure. Daily service had other ideas. A train with 2 giant locomotives looked efficient until one of them went down. Then half the train's power disappeared at once. Just over 300 AC6000CWs were built. Many were later rebuilt with smaller, more dependable engines. EMD's rival suffered a similar fate. The 6,000 horsepower war ended with both sides quietly turning many survivors into something less ambitious. Crews did not need a technical report to describe the HHP-8. They had nicknames. Some called it the Rhino. Others called it the Hippo. Neither was a compliment. The HHP-8 was built for Amtrak's Northeast Corridor and styled to resemble the new Acela equipment. It had 8,000 horsepower, could reach 125 miles per hour, and looked modern enough to suggest the old corridor was finally getting a clean start. Instead, the locomotive added a new layer of frustration. Its computers misbehaved in extreme weather and struggled with the changing electrical conditions along the route. It suffered wheel slip, demanded repeated software updates, and was later sidelined by cracks in brackets connecting the trucks to the body. By 2010, the Amtrak units reportedly needed unscheduled shop attention about once a week. Amtrak owned only 15. Every time one went down, a noticeable share of the fleet disappeared with it. Parts, training, and technical support were being spread across very few machines, and there were not many spares available when another Rhino needed attention. Amtrak finally ordered standardized replacements. By 2015, all 15 HHP-8S were retired after only about 15 years. For an electric locomotive, that is barely a career. Maryland's MARC system chose to refurbish its 6 units instead. One operator gave up. The other kept spending. Then the retired Amtrak fleet triggered one last dispute when the company financing the locomotives accused the railroad of stripping stored units for parts. The trains had stopped moving. The argument around them had not. And if the HHP-8 proved modern computers could still create an expensive headache, Number 5 shows British Railways could do the same thing with 2 small diesel engines and far less technology. British Railways ordered 117 Class 17s before a prototype had proven the design. That is the kind of confidence engineers usually prefer to see after testing. The Class 17 used a center cab with a low engine compartment on each side. The idea was to give drivers good visibility in both directions while keeping the locomotive compact. To make that shape work, the design used 2 small Paxman engines. Then both engines became a problem. The fleet suffered camshaft trouble, cylinder head failures, and cracked crankcases. Even after major modifications, availability stayed around 50 to 60%. Put plainly, on an ordinary day, roughly half the class might be sitting broken. The simpler Class 20, which British Railways could have bought instead, managed availability near 90%. Some Class 17s were so hopeless, they went almost directly from the factory into storage. And the promised visibility was not even that good. Those long, low noses still blocked the track immediately in front of the cab. So British Railways got the maintenance of 2 engines without receiving the main advantage used to sell the design. Withdrawals began only a few years after the locomotives entered service. By 1971, the entire class was gone from regular work. Many had lasted less than 5 years. Out of 117 built, exactly 1 survives. The Class 17 was unreliable. The next British diesel was unreliable, deafening, filthy, and sometimes unable to keep its own windows attached. The cab windows could fall out while the locomotive was moving. That was not even the first thing wrong with the Class 28. The locomotive used an unusual Kobo wheel arrangement, with a 6-wheel bogie at one end and a 4-wheel bogie at the other. Under the hood sat a Crossley 2-stroke diesel that British Railways wanted to compare with conventional 4-stroke power. Only 20 were built, and they were assigned in pairs to the fast Condor freight service between London and Glasgow. The engines failed constantly. They were deafeningly loud, threw out foul exhaust, and caused enough grief that the entire class had to return to the manufacturer for major corrective work. Then there were the windows. The original curved glass developed a habit of coming loose while the locomotive was running. British Rail eventually replaced it with flat windows, not because flat glass looked better, because the new windows were more willing to stay on the train. The electrical equipment was reportedly not the main issue, and British Railways considered replacing the engines. But traffic was falling. The class was tiny, and supporting 20 non-standard locomotives made less sense every year. They were moved away from prestigious work and sent to quieter duties in Cumbria before withdrawal. One unit, D5705, survived almost by accident after secondary work kept it away from the scrapyard. Then the Class 28 found an afterlife no one could have predicted. Its shape inspired Boco in Thomas and Friends. British Rail wanted the real locomotive forgotten. Millions of children remembered the face. This locomotive needed its own repair track and mechanics brought in from Germany. That was not part of the original sales pitch. Southern Pacific and the Denver and Rio Grande Western wanted more power for brutal mountain territory. Their conventional diesel electrics were working hard, so the railroads tried something radical. German diesel hydraulic locomotives from Krauss-Maffei. Each ML4000 used two Maybach V16 engines and hydraulic transmissions to produce around 4,000 horsepower. At the time, no American builder could match that figure in one locomotive. The machines arrived like the future. Then the mountains went to work on them. In long tunnels, the high-mounted air intakes could pull hot, exhaust-filled air from the locomotive ahead. Instead of clean, cooling air, the engines inhaled heat and fumes. The Rio Grande gave up quickly and sold its 3 locomotives to Southern Pacific. Southern Pacific went deeper and ordered 15 more. Then it created a dedicated service track at Roseville and staffed it with mechanics brought over from Germany. At that point, keeping the fleet moving had become a specialized operation of its own. The ML4000s were eventually moved away from the Sierra Nevada and assigned to flatter work. Once American builders offered reliable high-horsepower locomotives with conventional electric transmission, the reason for keeping these exotic imports disappeared. The experiment ended in 1968. Almost all were scrapped. One survives today as the last mainline diesel hydraulic locomotive in North America. Then they started catching fire. That is the U-50C story in 5 words. Union Pacific believed fewer giant locomotives could replace groups of smaller ones. GE answered with a 5,000 horsepower machine powered by 2 12-cylinder engines. 40 were built. They rode on 3 axle trucks recycled from Union Pacific's old turbine fleet, and GE used aluminum electrical cabling in places where copper would have added more weight. The aluminum wiring overheated. Electrical fires spread through the fleet's reputation almost as quickly as smoke spread through the cabinets. And the damage did not stop there. The truck frames cracked under the weight. Engines suffered low oil pressure. Cooling water leaked. Dynamic brake failures damaged their own grids. One high-voltage fire in the mid-1970s was severe enough to nearly finish a locomotive on the spot. Union Pacific rewired one unit with copper and proved the wiring issue could be fixed. Rebuilding all 40 was another matter. When freight traffic weakened in the 1970s, the railroad parked the U-50Cs. They never returned to normal road service. A few were briefly used as stationary generators during a coal strike. Imagine building a 5,000 horsepower freight locomotive and ending its career as a very large power outlet. By 1979, every U-50C had been scrapped. Not one survives. The most hated locomotive on this list may not have deserved the full sentence. The Pennsylvania Railroad T1 was a 4444 duplex steam locomotive with 2 sets of driving wheels under one rigid frame. Raymond Loewy wrapped it in a streamlined Art Deco body that looked more like a steel rocket than a traditional steam engine. 52 were built. They were powerful. They were fast. By many accounts, they could run well above 100 miles per hour. They were also notorious for wheel slip. The T1 could spin its drivers violently, not only while starting a heavy train, but at speed. High-speed slipping could damage the locomotive badly, and crews trained on the older, more forgiving K4 often found the T1 difficult to handle. It needed a careful hand. The timing was terrible. By 1948, the Pennsylvania Railroad had decided to dieselize its express passenger trains. The T1 fleet was barely established before the railroad's future moved in another direction. Every single T1 was eventually scrapped. Not one survived. That matters because there was no preserved locomotive left for later engineers to test. The reputation remained, but the machine that could confirm or challenge it was gone. Decades later, a 2008 study by the Pennsylvania Railroad's Historical Society argued that poor handling, limited training, and maintenance conditions may have made the T1 look worse than it really was. The locomotive may have been demanding without being hopeless. A group of enthusiasts believed that strongly enough to begin building a new one from original plans. T1, number 5550. The goal is not simply to create a museum display, it is to find out what the T1 could really do. The most hated locomotive of all may still get the second chance history denied it. Some of these locomotives earned every insult they received. Others may have been blamed for bad timing, rushed development, poor maintenance, or crews who were never given enough time to understand them. So which locomotive got a bad rap, and which one truly earned the hate? Tell us in the comments.